What is up, guys? Frosty Aussie here today for another Frosty Features. Today, we have the first member of our Astral team, the legendary, the one, the only Shadow King. So, if this is the first Frosty Feature that you have been to, what this is a comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I am your guide through the pages past. So, with that, let us begin. According to Scubbly, what this is the blog post description of the lore that they're presenting for the character, and we will rate this at the end of the feature. I will read it for you right now. The Shadow King is a powerful psychic entity from the astral plane who was created by the first nightmare. He found a vessel to possess in the psychic mutant Amal Farouk, amplifying his abilities to control minds, create illusions, and manipulate reality. Shadow King feeds on negative emotions like fear and hatred, and he seeks to dominate the minds of powerful mutants. His epic psychic battles have made the Shadow King one of the most dangerous and malevolent forces in both the physical and astral plane. That is the description. We will rate that at the end of the feature. This is who, things are going to get a little weird, okay? So, MSF is officially bringing in a character that is technically two different characters together. It's kind of similar to when we talked about Nemesis, right? When we did Frosty Features Nemesis, go back and check that out from a long time ago. They took three different versions of the same character and smashed them into one. In this situation, Shadow King is not this guy. Shadow King, but he is this guy. Shadow King, okay, we'll get there. Hold on. You're getting me ahead of yourself. Name unknown, okay? the Shadow King entity, there is a massive entity, right? In the multiverse, and he exists outside of the multiverse, right? That uses vessels. He possesses people to carry out his bidding. The first person that we are aware of in comic canon that what we call the Shadow King possesses is Amal Farouk, okay? After things happen with Amal Farouk and the Shadow King, we're going to call Amal Farouk and Shadow King two different things. Amal, he is the one that chooses the name the Shadow King, and the Shadow King goes with it after the fact. Also, after we see the Shadow King leave Amal Farouk, due to Amal Farouk's telepathic powers, right? So first appearance, X-Men number 117, all the way back in 1978. Powers and abilities, telepathy. So Amal Farouk is a very powerful telepath. He is on he not a similar level to Professor X, but he's very high. He's below. Professor X is the strongest telepath there is in the Marvel Universe. Shadow King is strong enough that if Professor X isn't paying attention, he can beat him, right? So he is a big old telepathic threat. And also we have a transferable conscious that is actually the Shadow King, right? So namely the use of telepathy and this transferring conscious to swap between vessels and control people. So the big threat with the Shadow King is that he's essentially a crazy powerful telepath that controls people. He's a big old mind controller, what have you, right? So for the sake of argument, and even what it seems like Marvel Strike Force Scopely was going for in the blog post, for the sake of argument, the entity that is possessing people is hereby known as the Shadow King. After his situation with Amal Farouk, there is ultimately him and Amal's personality sort of meld together, even when he goes into different beings. So as he possesses other beings, sometimes they go by Amal Farouk, or start looking like him, or transforming into him, or he appears again. So Amal Farouk sort of it's a vessel, but even as Shadow King has other main vessels, it kind of goes back to this, right? So Amal Farouk is Shadow King, but Shadow King is not Amal Farouk. That's the philosophical stance we have to take on this specific character, and that's what we need to keep in mind. So the entity itself is unnamed, but he does start going out off of Shadow King after he uses Amal Farouk as a vessel. So that is where we are at. So yes, so those are the powers and abilities, first appearance, all that stuff. came into mishmash. The way it sort of stands is kind of a mishmash in it of itself. Alias is the master of the games, and the spider, and of course Shadow King is an alias. So these are really just from different comic book arcs. There is a point where Amal Farouk kind of turns into a spider-like being, based on the Shadow King's powers. You could also find all this like scary-looking transform kind of stuff that Shadow King does. There is a bit of a plot. There's a bit of a plot element to his powers. But just know he is a formidable threat, pretty much in any kind of form that he takes. Affiliations: Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So, he also leads a crime syndicate in Cairo, but that's not an official affiliation through the Marvel Universe, so I didn't really know how to designate that, other than what I just said, I guess. But there is a stint where he is in Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. It's around the same time as, like, the Skinless Man is a part of this. This is kind of, we talked about this era, Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, is the same era in Frosty Features Phantom X, where we talk about him and the Skinless Man. So definitely check that out. All the plugs now. We're on episode 111. I'm gonna plug every one of them that I remember. Background. So, being as old as humanity, so that the way that it works, as stated by Scopely's blog post, Born of the First Nightmare, this is the first nightmare of humans, of humanity, and all of the multiverse. So the first human in all of the multiverse to have a nightmare spawned darkness in the heart of humans and created this entity which embodies that sort of philosophy, right? So, as old as humans perceive time, that's how old the entity known as the Shadow King is. If you're talking about specifically about Farouk, he is born in the 16th century in Egypt and operates within that. And one of the kind of plot powers that we talked about a little bit with the Shadow King is that he kind of, or excuse me, we didn't talk about it, but he can elongate the life of his vessels. So Amal Farouk has been around for hundreds of years, and he kind of holds on. They bond. They have a good time of it. So with that, who died? The Shadow King doesn't really count. He exists outside of space, but how the Shadow King got to the 616 is important. 616 being the main comic book continuity that we usually refer to here in Frosty Features. So, who died? So, in the case of Amal Farouk, he is born to an Egyptian merchant. Both of his parents, his mother, it's unmentioned to my knowledge how his mother died, but all we know is she has perished. And unlike most mutants manifest their mutant powers when they're teenagers, Amal is able to manifest his at a younger age, and so he uses his telepathic powers to help kind of prevent crimes and things like that around the merchant area where his father works. And his father ends up getting the plague and dying, and due to his uncontrolled, he's feeling a lot of things with his dad dying, and then he's also a super powerful telepath and not exactly knowing how to use that. He sort of accidentally feels his father die, and he experiences it himself as a living person. This puts him down a really dark path, and this is how this telepathic anguish is how Amal is found by the Shadow King, approached to the Shadow King, and it possessed and sort of melds minds with the Shadow King. So, can't be a superhero, supervillain without somebody dying. In this case, Amal Farouk's father is what puts him down the road. Manifestation of darkness. And I want to do both these at the same time. Tendrils from reality. Manifestation of darkness. So, as in Marvel, right, we have beings that are they're beings of concepts, right? Death is I actually had to explain this to one of my students the other day, because they asked me a comic book question, right? What's the difference between Death and Hela, right? Hela is the goddess of death. Death is death itself. Death is what nature of death is, right? And she's the embodiment of it, right? So in that, so the Phoenix Force is the spark of life, right? In this situation of the Shadow King, he is the entity that represents the darkness in humanity, right? So he is this concept embodied into a kind of mythical center that exists outside of the multiverse. And how he works is if let's say the multiverse is one big structure that's chilling in the middle of nothingness, right? The Shadow King is essentially an entity that's outside of it, right? And when he wants to mess with stuff, he sends a tendril in to control something, right? So these little tendrils he's got going in multiple universes at the same time, and each one of these tendrils is the Shadow King that is perceived in each of these universes. So the black scary fanged monster thing that shows up when it's the Shadow King that is being experienced in the comic books, or the dark figure that's going to be an MSF or whatever that's along with Amal Farouk, that is not the Shadow King as a whole. This is a small segment, a tendril of Shadow King. Think of it like symbiotes making their own little heads, right? They'll come out and they got little scary faces and teeth or whatever. It's kind of the same idea, but on a much larger scale, right? So tendrils from reality, that's kind of what that means. There's sort of a basis, and then he literally extends out to these different universes and realities to kind of affect them there, right? And not all of them include Amal Farouk, but because Amal Farouk's so closely related to him, it sort of has kind of become the thing in Marvel 616. But as soon as you hop outside of it, it gets a little wishy-washy and pretty confusing. But that's what happens when you get these kind of higher order cosmology characters. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. Next up is relationships. Very, very few relationships are aware. He doesn't really associate with people as much as he does controls them. So he's got deceased parents that are unnamed to my knowledge. And then the Phoenix Force I put down as a multiversal opposition because there were so few relations. So there are entities that directly oppose each other, and the Phoenix Force has a lot of entities that supposedly, like I said, a spark of life. Therefore, death would be the opposite. The Phoenix Force is because it's so popular as one of these kind of cosmological beings that it has many different shadows, many different opposites. So there's arguments that are made that the Shadow King is one of them. I will say there is no evidence that, other than the fact that he is a multiversal being and affecting multiple universes at the same time, there is no real proof that he's anywhere near as strong as something like the Phoenix Force, nor are there people that are possessed by the Shadow King. Because really, it really just seems like it's a possession that is extraordinarily strong. That is sort of his thing, right? And his danger really only lies in who he possesses. So that's something we'll see kind of in our notable events. So let's talk about his origin story. The first time we see him, this is that X-Men 117 kind of situation. So with this, we have a manifestation of darkness, as I said, born from the first nightmare of a human. So he comes upon Amal Farouk after the death of his father. He experiences death firsthand without dying, right? Amal Farouk. So puts him on a dark path, etc., etc., etc. This leads him to be controlled by the Shadow King. This leads him to decide to essentially take over the criminal syndicate, the Thieves Guild equivalent. I think they call themselves as the Thieves Syndicate. Once again, there's not a real name for it. But there is in the United States in Marvel, there is the Thieves Guild that Gambit's a part of. So it's kind of like that, but in Egypt. So some things I just want to throw out there for you to consider, right? The strength of Shadow King. You would think as a multiversal being, we would be influencing more than literally just the city of Cairo. But for 400 years, that's just kind of what he does, right? It's Cairo. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't really have any other way to expand upon that. So another thing with the Shadow King is he sort of has this he has a hedonistic kind of lifestyle or mindset. So the whole thing is and that could explain why he just kind of stays in the one spot and he doesn't have aspirations to at first, right? These change because superheroes get involved, right? So because for 400 years he's more or less unopposed, right? Just chilling, hanging out in Cairo, wrecking shit. He with Amal Farouk, he kind of just he leads a hedonistic lifestyle, so he gains a lot of weight because he's gluttonous. He eats a lot of food, and he's just kind of living life to the biggest. And he's pulling on all the money or whatever from thieving from people and what have you. And in this is where we find there's a huge crossover for anybody who's a fan of Storm. There is a huge the X-Men character Storm. There is a huge crossover where Storm is trained by somebody named Ahmad. Oh goodness, Ahmad Jabari, I'm pretty sure. She's trained in thieving from him, but he is part of this syndicate that is controlled by Amal Farouk, controlled by the Shadow King. To an extent, to a very real controlling extent, and this is before Aurora manifests her mutant powers, right? So she's not Storm Goddess yet. She is her parents died, and she is essentially an orphan on the streets, and she was taught, like I said, she was taught to steal from Jabari, and then controlled by the Shadow King. So in this situation, we have a Shadow King doing his thing, and then what had happened was we pick up on a strong telepath walking around Cairo, and we send Storm to go pickpocket said telepath. Said telepath recognizes Storm as a mutant and isn't able to get or puts up a pretty good hey, don't steal from me, child, I'm not gonna hurt you, whatever. And for those of you who can't pick up on context clues, this the particular mutant happens to be Professor Xavier. So Professor X, walking through Cairo, gets pickpocketed by this kid and reaches out telepathically to find the kid to get his wallet back. And in doing so, he finds Storm and also gets on the radar of the very strong telepath Shadow King. And as he's confronting Storm to get his wallet back, he gets blindsided by a psionic bolt and more or less gets knocked unconscious for a second, so long enough for Aurora to get away. And he's able to regain his consciousness, and he's like, oh man, there's a strong telepath here that like ambushed me, and somebody could have easily walked over here and killed me but did not, so what am I gonna do? So he gets up and he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna find this telepath and I need to figure out what the situation is. So he goes into he follows the temporal aura, and he goes into this bar, and in the bar is Ahmad Farouk sitting at a table. And Ahmad's like, you are a very strong telepath, I can tell. But that bolt I just sent at you, that's just a taste of my power. And you got knocked out. You folded quick, son. So, what I'm gonna say is, how about you work with me? With me and you, we'll be unstoppable. I can tell you're powerful, right? You're not as powerful as me, but I can tell you're powerful. Let's work together. We'll rule the world, no problem. And things will be great. And Xavier pretty much hits him with a great power, great responsibility, question mark. Like, have you not read Spider-Man? He's been out for a few years now, right? But he doesn't actually say great power, great responsibility, but that's the tone. He's like you have certain expectations that are of you because you are a powerful person. You should use it to help people. Why just help yourself? And he's like, cause it's fun. That's kind of where we're at. And they're like, all right, we got to throw down. And they're like, and Shadow King's like, great, let's throw down. And on the surface level, as you're sitting on Earth in Marvel 616, and the greatest telepaths probably on Earth together are fighting, it's probably the most boring fight in comic book history if you're just sitting in the bar. Because what had happened was they are sitting in the bar and they literally stare at each other until one of them loses. Because they go into the astral plane to fight, because the telepaths sort of have like this astral form where they kind of fight on a different level, on a different plane. So they have a mental battle, and they fight in this other realm. And in this other realm, Charles Xavier is insanely strong. But he's also wicked smart, right? It is Professor Xavier. He knows a couple of things. So he doesn't go to Super Saiyan 3 first, right? He feels out the Shadow King and tries to gauge, because he recognizes he's very powerful, and he treads carefully to figure out how powerful he actually is before he unleashes the whole thing and shows the Shadow King who the strongest telepath on Earth is. and he shatters and kills the tendril. So it's like he destroys the Shadow King, kills it. So he's breaking a tendril, right? And Ahmad, so as they're sitting in there, they're staring at each other, and then Ahmad Farouk's like, right? He's it. He gets KO'd, and Charles Xavier wins, and this canonically is the point in which Professor X is like, man, there's some bad dudes out there, and some of them are like, this guy could have beat me if I wasn't paying attention. I need to start a group of mutants that are out here to be able to protect humanity, be able to protect mutants from these sorts of people. I needed to create the X-Men. So that's pretty cool. And also this is canonically Charles Xavier's first run-in with Storm. So a lot of really cool stuff. Any new Storm was a mutant, but since her powers hadn't manifested, what have you, he had no way of actually knowing she was going to be the crazy powerful mutant she becomes. So that's the thing. The next one I want to talk about is Muir Island. So this is one of them. Ahmad Farouk comes back around a couple of times from here, as I said before. In Muir Island, it's just a cool story. With Muir Island, we do see Ahmad Farouk and the Shadow King being one and the same, but we don't have Ahmad Farouk's physical body. But it does come up. His name does come up as part of the Shadow King. So but the way that this is working, Moira McTaggart, is a scientist that often works with the X-Men, and then her story gets freaking wild. So I'm not gonna try to go way too. So at face value, if you read these older comics, that's what Moira McTaggart is. It's definitely way more complicated. She's crazy complicated. But anyway, she has a brother, a superhero named Proteus, and what she's trying to do is she has set up a research factory so that she can kind of try to rein his powers in and try to help him, because he's kind of all over the place. And so she makes this research lab. So her and Valerie Cooper, which is a mutant affairs type government person, are working at this factory. And Mystique is sort of there, kind of checking things out. And then we also have Jacob Rice, who is a FBI agent. These people are all in this factory. And Shadow King happens in trying to find a way to help her brother, Moira's brother. Shadow King finds the facility and possesses Moira McTaggart, and with that, he kind of starts spreading his influence out among the factory, so he possesses Vol to an extent, right? His possession also doesn't fully replace the personality. It's a little bit more complex than that. So he slowly affects them, so he's not full on controlling them. There's a bit of it's like you go do this, whatever. So namely, it's Moira at first, and then it kind of starts to spread, and then he actually takes the vessel from Jacob Rice, the FBI agent. And with that, he at first he orders Val Cooper to kill Mystique, and he thinks that Val Cooper has killed Mystique, and it's a whole thing. So what happened? He takes over this space because he's like, oh, the stuff at this research facility and the knowledge at this research facility, what I want to do is stop all telepaths on Earth so that I can be the only one and therefore rule Earth, right? Now we have bigger aspirations, right? After we got owned by Professor X and a couple other people along the way. At this point, we have bigger aspirations. We want to take over the Earth. We got to stop the telepaths. So we're going to use all the stuff here to do so. And so he told Val Cooper to kill Mystique. He thinks it happens. Turns out Mystique is pretending to be Val Cooper the whole time. And upon this revelation, she shoots the vessel, Jacob Reyes, in the head and kills the vessel that was belonging to Shadow King. Shadow King gets displaced, and they're like, "Yay, we won!" And at the same time, it's one of those face value things. You're like, "Yay, we won! Nothing bad's gonna happen now." And at this same time, Legion, who, for those of you are or aren't aware, is an Omega level mutant, to the utmost degree. He is Charles Xavier's son, and he is wicked powerful. Pretty much a character with all powers, if you will. He has come, and he's trying to search for Storm, and he was going to try to use the stuff on Muir Island to help him find her. And as he gets there, Legion has difficulties mentally because he has multiple personalities, multiple powers. Ultimately, Legion is a character that exists in multiple realities all at once as a single human, so his mind is a little messed up, and Shadow King's like, that guy's mind is weak, and he's wicked powerful. I'm gonna be him. So he possesses Legion, which serves a whole new freaking problem, right? So with this is a good example. Shadow King is about as strong as whoever he possesses, because he can possess multiple people at the same time, right? But he possesses Legion, and Legion's a freaking issue. So with this, operations at Muir Island continue, and it starts to catch notice because it's becoming a bigger deal. And Professor X finally hears about this, and he is privy to the fact that Legion is a part of this, and he's like, "Ah, crap, not my son. We need to put together a strike force team that a strike team that can specifically take out Legion." So he puts together this team specifically, kind of pivoting on the fact that Jean Grey is there, and he has to be there so that he can fight the Legion or the Shadow King or what have you. And by the time he gets there and starts battling Legion, that's when he becomes privy to the fact that the Shadow King's influence is here. So once he becomes privy to the fact, Professor X is like, all right, I know what to do. I'm going to go astral form. So he goes into astral form to find that there is much more Shadow King here than there was before, and he gets his ever-loving butt kicked. So he gets his butt kicked hard by the Shadow King, and he goes back to the regular world, and he's like, my X-Men, he's too strong, I need all of you. And so they all get astral forms because plot, and all of the X-Men in astral form plus Professor X fight Shadow King and take them out together, and they release the bonds from Legion, and the Shadow King is destroyed. Once again, we're destroying more tendrils because we see the Shadow King a million other times here. So with that, we get an X-Men win, and the Shadow King gets owned at this point. So up next is power level. Marvel Strike Force doesn't care about power levels, but here on Frosty Features we do. Now the way this works, if you are a multiversal threat, that means you can topple the multiverse as it was, not just your universe, but all universes at the same time. Universal threat means that you can end your universe, perhaps then hop on over to another universe and end that one there. And continue to do so one after the other. Cosmic means on the small level that you are a threat on a planetary scale, and it could blow up something like a small planetary body up to a solar system or galaxy, depending on your level of dedication and time. Nuclear means you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, leveling things like small cities all the way up to a small planetary body. Super Soldier means that you are beyond all human capabilities at all, right? So your power level is something like breaking down a brick wall all the way up to maybe leveling something like a city block. City means that you are a similar ability that can be achieved by a human being. Think Olympic level, the top tier human strength, whatever. Think about Olympic level people in Marvel. This is where we have a lot of ninjas, CIA agents, mercs, FBI, things like that. And then we have Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that is spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force, and without the rest of the Undying team to back him up, Greg is very much not a problem, not a threat. So for the sake of argument on that Asgardian physiology, we equate Greg to that of a regular human being. So with that, theoretically, I, as a regular human being, the Frostiest of Osties, am at I hadn't thought this one through yet. You caught me at 111. I am at a closing sale at Staples, and there's almost nothing left in there, and we're going for the final computer chair that's in the back, and I reach out to grab the box, and Greg slaps my hand away, and then all of a sudden we're tussling in the empty aisles of composition notebooks and printer ink. And at the end of the day, I, as the Frostiest of Osties, declare that I could best Greg in this situation. So I beat out Greg, and I get the fanciest chair at the ball, okay? So, in the case, Shadow King. So Greg, regular human being level. In the case of Shadow King, what we have a multiversal being without much indication as to what his actual power is outside of the astral plane. He really seems like he only has a physical effect, a power scaling effect of some kind only on the astral plane. But because he never throws his whole self into it, there really is no good scale for what that is. Outside of that, he's only as strong as the people he possesses, and he only possesses people that he can find that are of weak enough mind, right? So he possesses a mutant named Karma, who's a telepath. We've got Amal Farouk. We've got Legion, who obviously has mental issues, but all of these to say he fails at possessing people like Professor X, Jean Grey, are people that are very sound on these ends. So it's really hard to actually place him, and ultimately he could be up to multiversal. I'm gonna argue that he's universal just for the fact that I believe, spoiler alert, if Legion ever comes to the game, I believe Legion is at a universal or multiversal power level. And because he can get somebody like that has those kind of issues like Legion, he definitely has the chance to be up there in the multiversal universal threat. But it really seems his power really seems tied to his motives and who he can find, and he doesn't seem to be omnipotent in any kind of way, so he doesn't find people very easily. So you know, there's always something stopping him from controlling like a Scarlet Witch or something, who actually could just like, you know, put a hard stop to things. So it's kind of hard to say, but I would say due to his potential, I'm going to put him at universal. He might be cosmic. He might be nuclear. He's very easily in those three, maybe even multiversal depending, right? Because even as a claimed direct opposition to the Phoenix Force, there is no proof that he's actually physically that powerful, whereas the Phoenix Force manifests as fire, right? So quite powerful. And then the blog post, I had a tough time with this too, right? It's a tough character. It's really two characters into one, and I think that's why it's kind of weird. So I've had a tough time with the character. I had a tough time with the blog post. I feel like this is a well-described blog post. And it really seems like the character we're getting is the entity, not Amal Farouk, but it does bring up Amal Farouk, and he is what we're seeing in the game, right? Whereas they very easily could have pushed it together like Scopely does and just say Amal Farouk is the Shadow King, that's it. They kind of hint at that not being it. With that, there is a lack of specificity here, but I still think it's a good description. So I put nice try, as it's sort of like my A rank, B rank. So this is my B rank kind of assessment of the situation. But I think it's an okay blog post. It's a little confusing because the character is kind of confusing. They tried to tackle a character that's kind of hard to explain, and that is what it is. So there it is. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Shadow King moments are. I would love to hear it if I got anything wrong. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube, where it doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks. And as a reminder, I stream at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, where we do Frosty features live on Sundays. I hope that you all enjoyed this. I hope that you all have a fantastic weekend. Most importantly, stay cool.